Has he signed yet?
Don't run.
I'll do my best. Thank you, Mr. President. I had the great pleasure of introducing Colin Anthony to you in October, so I'm not going to do it again. If you can't remember, it's too bad.
I wasn't here.
Anyway, today I have another great pleasure. His wife is here too and will assist him. The one thing that's different is that Colin, since he last was here, has had a contretemps with a member of my profession. He's had a hip replacement. It was a successful contretemps. He's done very well. Without further ado, I'll hand you over to Colin Anthony, going to speak about Chile and Argentina.
All I can see is my phone.
Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for inviting me. This is truthfully the first time I've been out for the last 5 weeks, and I'm so fed up with crosswords and jigsaw puzzles, you can't imagine it, you know. So it is nice to be here and to talk to you about one of my favourite destinations, that is to Argentina and Chile. I should mention that your kind donation today goes, as always, to Little Havens Children's Hospice. So on their behalf, thank you very much indeed for your generosity. I'll try and get it right this time. I think I may have mentioned this last time, but this is actually the 245th talk I've done for charity, and I'll try and get it right this time, I promise you. Right, okay. I haven't quite got it right yet, but we've got here again, right? Let's back up here.
Maybe that one. That's a C, you know. Sorry, I should have stopped. What's up? You're looking for the fault.
Okay, someone's saying
I'll get there in a minute. I'm not there.
German war criminals. Yeah, that's right.
Hang on. Right.
That's it, that's Argentina.
Okay, right, we'll stop there.
That's the equator, of course, with that green.
Got to get up again now, this is the trouble, isn't it? 5 weeks a day, actually, it was actually at 2 o'clock, I went down to the theatre 5 weeks ago then. It's not bad going with. Fine, well our trip today is actually going to take us to Buenos Aires, which is up here, and we're going to come down south, right the way down to Ushuaia, which is the end of the world. Actually, I normally call this talk to the end of the world and back. Then we're going to go to the Perito Moreno Glacier, we're going to go up to Santiago, and right up to the Atacama Desert, the driest place in the world. Well, the Spanish first probed this area. I'll go back, sorry, I didn't want to do that, sorry, I'll get it right in a minute. The Spanish first probed this area known as Argentina, Uruguay and Paraguay back in 1516, where they were looking for silver and gold. Then in October 1520, Ferdinand Magellan discovered the strait down here, which actually joins the Atlantic to the Pacific Ocean. Magellan noticed that the natives down there wore very little clothing, and they huddled around fires at night. But when he saw the fires burning on the shore, and even in their boats, he called the area Fireland, or in Spanish, Tierra del Fuego. The Spanish established forts all along the land side there of this channel to protect the territory, particularly from the English. But their soldiers died of starvation and exposure in the dreadful weather. Well, South American landmass was called Terra Australis by the Spaniards. They thought it stretched right down to the South Pole. Well, in 1576, Francis Drake, to be kind and adventurer, to be unkind a pirate, navigated the Magellan Strait out into the Pacific. And when he got out of the Pacific here, there was a very strong wind which blew him right down to the south. He discovered you could actually go round the south of South America. Until that time, nobody knew about that. Well, in fact, the English kept that a secret from the Spanish for 100 years. Why do you like us? Anyway, times have changed, and now there's both Argentina and Chile have new airports to meet and encourage the tourist trade. And this is the airport at Iguazu, at the extreme northernmost tip of Argentina. The Iguazu River actually is the border between Brazil which is on the left, and Argentina, which is on the right, which is an island there. The Iguazu is actually 800 miles long and gives its name to the spectacular waterfalls on the frontier. After flowing into what's called Parana River, then into the River Plate, the river actually reaches the Atlantic down in Buenos Aires, forming the second largest draining system in South America. Right, now this map is actually a view of the falls which we obtained. It's quite useful. We actually, if you ever go there, then you've got to stay in the Sheraton Hotel, which is on south down here. Don't go and stay in Brazil. It's much better to stay over here. Because you have what here is called the lower walks, and then you have the upper walks, or they call it inferior and superior. Anyway, the lower and the upper walks. And you also can take a little train ride out here to the Llanto de Pablo, the Devil's Throat. So it's quite a lot to see there. And I say, in my view, it is one of the most beautiful places in the world. Well, the Iguazu itself flows either side of this island, which is called San Martin Island, there's a huge, furious cauldron of water known as the San Martin Falls, which are directly ahead there. The strength of the torrent flows over the San Martin Falls in February, which is actually the height of the wet season. High temperatures and the rainfall and humidity have created a rainforest here, resembling the tropical Amazonian rainforest up in the north. In fact, there are 2,000 identified plant species, 400 species of birds, and many mammals and reptiles. So this is actually, they had a bit of a drought at one time, a bit like here actually, and they were able to create these walkways out under the falls. Now why you want to go out there and get drowned, I don't know, but they give you coats and you can get out there and get soaked. It's quite fun, quite fun. Well, this is, say, the view of the falls from the edge looking across, but all of a sudden when the storm approaches, the scenery becomes quite dramatic, as you can see here. One of my favourite pictures of the falls when you've got this dramatic scene of the rain, the rainfall, and you see the storm clouds in the background. It's quite spectacular. Well, having taken the train out to the furthermost point of the falls, there's a catwalk across here, you see, which takes you to what's called the Devil's Throat, which is a giant hole into which the river plunges. Well, having taken the train out to this furthest point, the deafening cascade plunges down and sprays up from the hole, and the prevailing wind does its best, of course, to soak all the visitors. Going across into Brazil, on the Brazilian side, Tony Blair came here for a few days when he was solving the problems of Latin America. And here and Cherie stayed at what's called the Cataratas Hotel, overlooking the Brazilian side. And that's where, this is the view he would have had from his bedroom window. A panoramic view, which I think is quite spectacular, quite close to the hotel. Well, I said this is February, the wet season. It certainly was wet, but the rain had its compensations with a great quantity of water flowing over the 275
some incredible photos, aren't they?
275 waterfalls. The creation of this park was by a man called Alberto Santos Dumont. Now, who was he? Well, he was the first man who in 1901 circled the Eiffel Tower in an airship with an electrically driven propeller. But he made some money and he invested in this park, which is quite wonderful. As on the Argentinian side, again you have catwalk which take you out into the middle of the river. Everywhere you go, the place is shrouded, of course, in mist. You walk right out here, and everywhere you look, there are little waterfalls everywhere around, 275 of them. In my view, of all the places we've been to in the world, I've been to a few, this is probably one of the most beautiful I've ever been to. Well, reluctantly, we have to leave Iguazu, and we go down to the capital of Argentina, Buenos Aires. Until 2001, Argentina had the highest per capita gross domestic product in Latin America, with annual growth of around 6% between 1991 and 1998. Then everything, I'm afraid, went pear-shaped. They had a recession, their public debt soared, I don't know, heard before, anyway. The basic problem was tax evasion, excessive bureaucracy, corruption, and a very inefficient judiciary system. Well, in December 2000, like here, isn't it? In December 2001, Argentina defaulted on its foreign debt, and the peso was devalued by 70%. It all became a bit serious, but after a time, with their agricultural exports and manufacturing contributing 70% to their exports. They really have improved considerably. Now, of course, the country has similar sort of problems with the banking crisis that we've faced, unfortunately. We're looking a bit like this is from the airplane actually, looking down on a Roman amphitheatre. This is the home of Argentina's #1 football club, Club Atlético River Plate. Rio de Plata, or River of Silver, was named after the precious metals which were found by Portuguese and Spanish explorers. Latin for silver is Argentinum, and that's how the name Argentina was derived. The Plaza de Mayo is the focal point of much of Argentina's political history. And at the far end is what's called the Casa Rosada. The Casa Rosada, formerly the presidential palace and seat of the national government. It was from the balcony here, up here, that the Cinderella of Argentina, Eva Perón, addressed her people. And Madonna actually crooned for the movie Evita from the same spot. Eva Perón met Juan Perón at an earthquake relief fundraising event in 1944. And she was actually the driving force in Perón's rise to power, bullying him towards success. In fact, in many ways, she was even more ruthless than her dictator husband. Nearby is a very beautiful town council building, a bit better than the Romford or Havering council building, I think, actually, even Brentwood. It's called the Cabildo. It's called the Cabildo. There's a very attractive church, which is the Nuestra Señora de Pilar, and provides access to an historic cemetery called the Recoleta Cemetery, where wealthy and powerful Argentinians are buried. And when Eva Perón died, her body, she was actually 33 years of age, her body disappeared, mysteriously disappeared, and it was actually discovered in Spain. Now she's been laid to rest here in the Recoleta Cemetery with just a small plaque to identify her resting place. It's a very colourful artist quarter down here in the dock area, and the houses are hardly of architectural merit, but I think they made rather a nice colourful picture. And also they provide a backdrop for the artist to display their work. Now there was an artist sitting on a seat here and he got up and walked away when I took the picture. A bit disappointed now. Right, now we're going back to our map and we're going down to the end of the world. Let's say down to the bottom here to Ushuaia. The border between Chile and Argentina, which you can see this line down here, actually divides Tierra del Fuego, which is this piece down here. You can see it come here. And most of the area actually is Chilean rather than Argentinian, as you can see. And the reason for that is that in 1978, the Pope actually was asked to mediate on the border dispute covering the Beagle Channel. And many thought his decision, as you can see, favoured Chile. Access to the Argentinian part is by ferry. People have to come down here by ferry to get down south, or they can go through Chile, which actually costs them a little bit of extra loot. You know. And down here there is a rather long runway. It's 3/4 of a mile long. Why would they need a long 3/4 mile runway? Well, just out here in the ocean is, of course, the Malvinas. So they put the runway down here so they can go to bomb the Falkland Islands during the Falkland War. The town of Ushuaia actually doesn't have a main square, but the streets rise sharply, providing views of the Beagle Channel. Charles Darwin explored the area in the 19th century, and the strait now bears the name of Darwin's ship, the SS Beagle. The English-based Patagonian Mission Society, under its leader a man called Alan Gardner, came to Patagonia in 1848. Now his intention was to compete with those terrible Chileans who were introducing Spanish popery into Argentina, and they thought this is not good enough. So, and Gardner was very unhappy when he saw that the people down there weren't wearing any clothes. So he sent home for some second-hand clothes, dressed all the people, who were then wiped out in an epidemic of measles. So it just shows you if you're a missionary, be a bit more careful with your looking after people. Anyway, the backdrop to Ushuaia is quite dramatic. Up here you have the jagged glacial peaks rising from sea, going up to about 1,500 metres, 5,000 feet. This is, of course, is the end of the mountain range, the Andes, the longest chain of mountains in the world. And actually, there's a chairlift here. You can go up. You can ski all the year round on the Glacier Marcial in Ushuaia. The trip out into the Beagle Channel is quite fun. You see all the cormorants, the fur seals, and the sea lions. There's a distinct no man's land, as you can see here, between the sea lions and the cormorants. They keep apart. But the warmth of the sunshine is very pleasant, most acceptable when you know, it's quite often very cold. In fact, when we went down there, they said to us, whatever you do, you've got to take thermal underwear, you've got to take anoraks, you've got to take fur hats, you've got to take boots, everything. We went down, it was a scorching hot day, and everybody wearing thermal underwear and fur hats was steaming. Quite amusing. Anyway, you do get gale force winds along this particular area here. And this chap just surfaced as he seemed somewhat indignant, being spied on by a boatload of tourists who happened to be passing by. On the Isla Lobos, they have what are called fur seals, or sea walls as the Spanish speakers call them, because of their very thick manes. They share the territory with the cormorants, as you can see, and fur seals actually became almost extinct because of commercial exploitation. Heading back towards Ushuaia, and if you have aspirations to explore Antarctica, then you would join a Russian ship which would take you down to Antarctica. Ushuaia had for many years benefited from tax exemption, which encouraged industry down there, electronics assembly, fishing and food processing, but that preferential tax ended in 2003, so now they substantially rely on tourism. There's a rather magnificent natural park here, National Park of Tierra del Fuego, which contains lakes and rivers and peaks and glaciers, but there's no map of the place. Why is there no map? Well, nobody can work out where the border is, so they won't go on that. Nobody has a map. But to see the park is quite splendid if you go by train. This little train here was quite wonderful. The railway was constructed to assist the logging industry when Ushuaia was the site of a penal colony. Like all small boys, I wanted to see how the engine worked, as you can well imagine. Well, in 1884, when the Argentinians were staking a claim to the territory, they created a penal colony down in Tierra del Fuego for political as well as criminal prisoners. And the stumps of the trees show they were pretty good at cutting things down, but not very good at actually reforestation. The blueness of this lake here is caused by the powdered rock or glacial milk which comes down from the mountainside. The prison itself, which was really for political as well as the criminal community, is now a museum, and that's actually a waxwork image there. He wasn't about to lock me up. Until it was actually closed in 1947. It held 800 inmates in 380 cells, designed for single occupancy. It's a bit like a British prison. This is one of the original trains which transported the inmates in their work in cutting down the trees. Well, after leaving Ushuaia, it's a 1 hour flight to a place called Rio Gallegos, then a bumpy 5-hour road journey to Calafate. And the roads actually are quite reasonably good as for South American standards. But when you see, if you get behind a vehicle in front, you don't see anything for miles actually, so you're going completely covered in dust. So this is Patagonia. As I mentioned, when Magellan came here in 1520, he observed that the natives didn't wear any clothes. So he also noticed that the natives wore actually animal skins on their feet as shoes, and that caused large footprints. Well, he therefore decided to call the country the land of the big feet, which in Spanish is Patagonia. This is a typical Patagonian outpost on the Estancia El Galpon, and the gaucho would live here a solitary life with his herd of sheep and cattle. The area covered by an estancia is something like about a 250,000 acres. Due to a significant reduction in demand for wool, and the consequent fall in prices, the ranch owners have opened up their farms to the tourist trade, offering horseback rides, excursions, observation of herding and sheep shearing. And wool now sells at something around about 10p a kilo, which means 4 to 5 sheep give you about 50p a year, so there's not much point in keeping sheep. But you try to keep the sheep as long as you can. In fact, this came from the coaches. It's not a very good picture, but also you see a few sheep out there. The grass here is pretty tough. In fact, the sheep can only live for about 5 years as their teeth wear out on the grass. And so in fact they discovered that actually they can provide the teeth with the sheep with false metal teeth, as a result of which they can keep their human going for a little bit longer. And 1 acre of land can only support 4 or 5 sheep, so not a great business, not a great business here. This chap is a relative of the ostrich. It's a flightless bird. It's called a rhea. Now their family life is unusual, to say the least, and during the mating season several females lay up to about 30 eggs in a single nest. Now one male will incubate all those eggs, and once they've hatched he'll care for the chicks until they can fend for themselves. Now if there's such a thing as reincarnation, I don't want to come back. From Califate, it's a morning's drive out to the Argentine Glacial National Park, passing, you see Lake Argentina there, the blue line, the largest body of water in Argentina. The Argentine Glacial National Park is a UNESCO heritage site. It was created in 1937. It's on the east of the Andes, and on the border with Chile, covering something like 1.5 million acres. Only a few thousand years ago, the whole area was covered in glaciers, and this lake, which is called the Rico, Rich Arm, was once a river of ice. Now at this point we're about a mile away from Perito Moreno Glacier, the smallest of the 3 major glaciers in the national park. The others are the Uppsala and the Biema. The Moreno is probably the most accessible and the most spectacular. It may be the smallest, but it's still huge, it's still growing, being about 22 miles long and 2 miles wide and 210 feet high, something like the height of 10 double-decker buses. This is a plan of the park, and you can see a channel here where the water flows through from the Rico out into Lake Argentina, and quite often the ice field it dams the channel. It's done something like 15 times in the last 100 years. When the passageway is blocked, the pressure of the water obviously it attempts to recover its channel out into into Lake Argentina, and eventually millions of tons of ice force the water out through to into the main lake there. It's quite a spectacular place to come to. The catwalks again, they've got catwalks over the bottom which allow you to see the course. And we're here looking at a closer view of the glacier and the channel flowing through from north on its way to Lake Argentina, then onto the Santa Cruz River and out into the Atlantic. It snows on the ice field around about 300 days a year, and the snow compacts and then recrystallizes into ice flowing slowly eastward. The top layer of the glacier is actually fresh snow, below which the snowflakes become granulated, then they turn to ice, which turns into a viscous fluid, meaning that somewhere between solid and fluid. As I said, there are catwalks here. You see a catwalk along the bottom here, and you can walk along there. You have to be careful to keep it on the bottom here, because large chunks of ice will actually break off and fall into the lake and cause quite a spectacle and a splash. In fact, hello, sun's gone. Battery's gone. Oh dear, hang on a bit. Oh, it's gone. Oh, it's gone too far. No. No, I think my battery's gone. Sorry, I've gone too far. What's that? Sorry. I've gone on side. That's it. Yeah, here we are. We're there now. Okay. There, I don't know. Right. Technology and nightmare. Anyway, so the catwalks are down here, and then we stood here for about an hour and a half waiting for this chunk of rock to fall into the river. No, it wasn't. Oh, painful it really was waiting there for that to fall. But it was that's sort of the excitement you expect of these on these occasions. Well, here is another picture of it. well, slightly better picture, I think, looking through the trees of the. Well, you can actually approach the glacier along the Brazo Rico lake by boat, and the passageway over here is out into the Lake of Argentina. The rock face on the right-hand side here, you see, is being ground away over millions of years as the glacier receded. But this is a 210-foot high ice wall, and it looks so immense as you get closer. It really gets immense. And the beauty of the spectacle is enhanced by you see the turquoise powdered rock particles held in a suspension in the ice. So it's called rock flour because it consists of finely ground particles of rock. And it's rather like a church steeple, isn't it? The light shining through, it's quite beautiful. Well, all of a sudden, just as we were about to leave, a great chunk of ice crashed into the water and really made my day. Really was something we've been waiting for, and it was really wonderful to see. Across the border, you see now, you see it slightly, that is Chile on the left-hand side. You see how narrow it is as a country. It's actually, Chile is something like 2,700 miles long and no more than 110 miles wide at the widest point. It was actually created when I think the Pope decided where the border would be. I don't think he really liked the Chileans at the time, so he made up for it later on. Anyway, we're going from Ushuaia up to all the way up to Santiago, which is here, and then way up to the north of the country. Actually, the country has such different climates, really. You've got, of course, the cold area down the bottom here, you've got the Mediterranean climate in the centre, and you've got the Atacama Desert in the north. So it's an incredibly varied country from a weather standpoint. At one time, this was a huge sheep estancia, and now it's a UNESCO Biosphere Reserve. It's called the Hostelia de Torres, which sits beneath the snow-capped mountains in the heart of the Torres do Paine National Park. This is actually the Salto Grande, just a little waterfall by as things go in this part of the world. But the weather looks extremely calm, but all of a sudden the wind came up, and this one of these ladies here was actually blown off her feet and quite badly injured. In fact, you can get here something like 4 seasons in a day. In some towns in Patagonia, there are ropes along the street, so when you go shopping, you could hold on to the rope to go from shop to shop. So it is quite a country. And here we are looking at the Salto Grande, and all of a sudden the weather started to deteriorate. The wind came up, and these poor little ducks were paddling away, trying to keep above water. But within seconds, the wind dropped. Around this blue lagoon, you could see the guanacos, or llama guanacos, as they're given their proper title, were grazing. Quite friendly little animals. They used to be hunted at one time, but by pumas, but the pumas have all been eliminated, so they don't have a problem now, except for the tourists, of course. But this little chap didn't mind having his picture taken. He barely flinched as we approached. Lovely little chap. Up in the air here you can see a couple of condors flying on the thermals. Condors are in fact vultures, and they have something like a 9-foot wingspan. The granite pillars of the Torres dominate the landscape of the national park. One nice little picture here with an S that you can see there, which the photographer was rather like, I don't know why. If you want to go anywhere in the world, this is a wonderful place to be. If you like horse riding, the park is wonderful for horse riding or walking. It's a very lovely place to go to, just to visit. But as I said, it's named after the 3 towers in the background, the Torres. And a final look at them as they stretch up there, and we continue our journey south. We had to go south in order to go north, which took about 10 hours to go that south. And on our way, we came to a Chilean army garrison and penal settlement called the San Otway Penguin Reserve. These are what are called Magellanic penguins, also known as jackass penguins, because of the braying noise that they make. They're quite tame, but will bite you if they get close. Penguins achieve something that I'm afraid human beings cannot always match. They mate for life. It was necessary, I say, to travel south in order to get to the airport at Punta Arenas to fly north. And here we are flying over the Andes towards Santiago, and you get some spectacular views of the Andean range with so many glaciers there. The Andes are cooled by a solid sheet of ice the size of Wales, actually. We were more fortunate than a group who were in a plane flying over here in the 1950s. It disappeared from the radar screens and was never traced. In fact, in about 2000, the parts of the airplane actually reached the end of the glacier, and the remains of the people and the remains of the airplane were actually discovered, and they've been compacted in the ice for 50 years and came to light say, when the ice melted. Santiago is named after St. James, Santiago, and it sits between two Andean mountain ranges. So the weather is mild all the year round. It's a city of 14,000 buses. All the drivers like to think they're the late Juan Fangio, the 5-time world champion racing driver. So it's a very dangerous place, really. The city was actually established by a man called Pedro de Valdivia, who was sent down by Pizarro, who was the Spanish conqueror of Peru. He came down here to conquer Chile in 1540. He had just 175 Spanish soldiers and a contingent of Native American men. And so he founded Santiago in 1541. The Spanish ruled here until 1810, when Bernardo O'Higgins, an illegitimate son of the Irish-born Spanish governor of Chile, led a revolution against the Spanish rule. The royalists actually defeated the patriots, and O'Higgins fled, but he came back later on and became a virtual dictator for 6 years. Became unpopular, as they always do, was deposed, and spent the rest of his life in exile in Peru. This is called the Palazzo de Maderna, the presidential palace. It was built in 1805. In 1970, a socialist, Salvador Allende, came into power. And one of his objectives was to nationalise the truck transport system, which didn't go down too well. And it caused a strike, and the government crumbled. There was an unsuccessful military coup in 1973. And following that, Allende appointed the relatively obscure General Augusto Pinochet Ugarte, big mistake, as his interior minister. Well, of course, to show his gratitude, Pinochet unleashed a coup d'etat in 1973, a big battle in the square. Allende committed suicide. Allende committed suicide. Allende committed suicide. Not too far now. Go back, sir. Do something civilized, will you? I press it twice, actually. I'm sorry, Jean. I get ticked all the time, you know. I don't know why I bring her. I don't know. I needed her today, I tell you. I needed her last couple of months, too. Anyway, when Allende shot himself with a gun which was given to him by Fidel Castro, small world. Thousands of Allende supporters were actually taken to the football ground, shot, and their bodies were thrown out into the sea. Hundreds of thousands went into exile. Pinochet moved out all the poor from Santiago, and there's a curfew for 8 years during his 16-year rule. More about that, I'm sure you know anyway. Every former Spanish city has, of course, its Plaza de Armas, and Santiago is no different, with its cathedral on the left-hand side. Slightly different view of the cathedral, reflected in skyscrapers. So it was quite nice, really. When you go up to the top of the town, to a city, to a spot where you can look down over the city, you can see they've got a Millennium Dome, and there's work from the day they opened it, actually. Leaving Santiago, it's a 3-hour flight north to the Atacama, and it's quite evident, you see here, the desert stretches down to the sea. Now, what is this line you see down here? You can guess what it is? is actually the Pan American Highway, which stretches from Alaska down to Tierra del Fuego, something like 9,000 miles. It's the longest road in the world, and so it goes right the way down to the south. From the air, you get you see an occasional oasis in the mountains, and they're caused by the fact that you get the Humboldt current, which comes up from the south, beating the Pacific current coming from the north. That creates some mist. The mist comes across the mountains. And that's how you get the odd fogs, which then creates these small areas of there's water. Now we're coming close to the Atacama. This is coming towards the oasis of San Pedro Atacama. We're near the Bolivian border. In fact, that mountain, the symmetrical volcano, is Volcan Lincanabo on the border with Bolivia, about 30 miles away. It's there are 2,000 volcanoes in the Andes, with some peaks are something like 5 miles above sea level. The Andes have risen something like 100 feet in the last century. The Himalayas are in fact shrinking, and in time, not in our time, but in time, the Andes will be the highest mountain chain in the world. The oasis of San Pedro Atacama was once on the cattle trail, and that was there to meet the demand of beef in the nitrate mines run by the Germans. Now it's a primary activity for tourism. The lady here trying to keep the dust down. But it's been run as a hotel, a lovely little hotel. We stayed there. Food was excellent. Our room was, as I said, mud brick walls, but it was cool inside, very pleasant. In San Pedro, there's a most interesting little church, which was built in the 17th century, and the bell was added, I think, in 1890. But the inside, the roof struts are made of cactus wood, and they're held in place by llama straps. There's no nails holding it in place at all. Very pleasant place to sit, relax, and spend a few minutes thinking how very fortunate you are to have the opportunity to visit this lovely country. San Pedro has a fantastic museum created by a Belgian priest called Gustave Lepage. Assisted by villagers, he established one of South America's finest museums. And these gold ornaments were used in religious ceremonies 3,000 years ago. And a golden shoe dating back to 1000 BC. Pride of place goes, however, to Miss Chile, 100 BC. Her body dehydrated in the undersoil, and as a result her skin stuck to her bone structure and her original hair was preserved. She was a real beauty 2,000 years ago. Cool. Tall, and we're dawn and we'll come up to the El Tatio geysers, the world's highest geyser field, requiring a 4 AM start from San Pedro. When you walk across the surface of the volcano, you can feel the tremors under your feet. There are no barriers or anything to stop you from falling in. And in fact, a Frenchman fell in this hole, it's called Frenchman's Hole, and he was never seen again. The crust is very thin, and once you don't, though, you don't get that swell of bad eggs which you get in places like Rotorua in New Zealand. So it's quite a lovely place to come to. Well, of course, these must be ladies swimming at 6:30 in the morning. Goodness gracious me. No men there. They were more sensible than that. They were just pool party, you know. But there was an intention, as you see here, to generate power from using the geothermal energy. But they discovered that once they started using the steam, there was nothing for the tourists to see, so they gave that up. It was a bad job in the end. But what's so attractive here is everything is exactly as nature intended, and I hope sincerely that it will remain so. And as you leave the geyser field, you see a puff of smoke above Mount Zaranabo, another reminder of the ever-present volcanic activity. The Andes, as I say, are seismically unstable, having been formed by what's called the Nazca Plate, which is out in the Pacific, pushing against the South American continental plate. And of course, so therefore you get so many earthquakes and volcanic activity in this area. Now I don't know whether anybody can see the rabbit. Can you see the rabbit? Oh, he's up there somewhere. There he is. There you are, the rabbit there. Well, he's not actually a rabbit, he's called a viscacha, and they are only in danger from the fox-like creature called the sparrow. But when you look around at the area, there he is, closer to him. When you look around at the area, why on earth would anyone live there? Can't be much to eat, can there really? It's very inhospitable terrain. But if you're thinking of going to the moon, there's no better place to test your equipment than here in the Valley of the Moon. The Valley of the Moon is about 6 miles southwest of San Pedro, and it's an incredible spectacle. Those of you who are like Wallace and Gromit, well, here are the Wallace and Gromit little hills that Wallace and Gromit went over, you know, or machine they created went over these little hills in the Wallace and Gromit films, you know. The robot, that's right, yeah. And this is, of course, this rock formation is Our Lady with baby Jesus and the 3 wise men. Imagination's good, I hope it is. One objective coming here was actually to see the sunset, and you had to climb up this sand dune, and it was 45 minutes up and 5 minutes down. Every time you took a step, you went down again. It was unbelievable. Progress very slow, but it was quite fun. But the sunset wasn't really much good. But as the sun set, the rocks changed colour, a bit like the Grand Canyon, really. You can see, looking east out there, you see Lincoln Arbor, which is quite beautiful. And a final view looking at the orange glow over towards Bolivia. But just before we leave Chile, I've got to tell you a little bit of the wine. We went to this vineyard just outside Santiago, the home of a man called Carlos Godin, which is, he's turned into a hotel. And if you're an arms dealer, there's no better way of laundering your ill-gotten gains than to invest it in a vineyard. Also, if you're wanted by the FBI, dead or alive, and you can't leave Chile, well, it isn't a bad way to live. You know? Much of the wine here is exported to Japan, and the Japanese buyers come along and stay in his place. You see, and here's the bottling plant with white wine, and here's some, you see the Archimedes screw here, which takes the bottles along to the inspection point on the right-hand side here, the lady making sure all the bottles are full up. They store the non-vintage wine in these large stainless steel containers. The vintage wine is held in French oak casks. But there's no better way to end a visit to Argentina and Chile than to enjoy a barbecue in the glorious sunshine in the garden of the vineyard of Carlos Godin, sampling his red and white wines, made us forget that we had to have a 24-hour flight home next day. So that, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much indeed.
It is getting a bit late, so if we have any questions, have to be very brief.
Shut up, Ron.
No questions? No.
Well, Michael will pass you over to the front.
President, fellows. Colin, I don't know, what did you speak about in October? Because I wasn't here.
We went to Myanmar, Burma.
Ah. Anyway, I think we'd all agree it was very interesting. It gave quite an insight to the whole of Argentina and Chile. You don't realise perhaps how vast they are until you gave your talk. I'm sure you all enjoyed it, fellows, and I would like you to show your appreciation in the usual way.
I only have 17 different talks, so if I carry on like this, it'll be 1996. I'll be 95 when I finish.
Brilliant.
Oh yeah. Gave you a very good picture.
I know some of you have got appointments to get to, so can I remind you of the apologies book? The menu is under discussion with Jeff and the chef after this meal, so it will go on the website. Please make sure you look. If you'd like to be upstanding, please, for the final toast, which is Rotary and Peace the World Over.
Peace the World Over.
And safe journey.